Hi, I'm Devletay Magambet, and I'm the host of the Principles of the Microeconomics course. Throughout this course, you will see me in video lectures along the way that will guide you in your studies. For students who care about how the world works, microeconomics is probably the most relevant, interesting, and important subject they can study. A good understanding of microeconomics is vital for managerial decision-making, for designing public policy, and more generally for appreciating how a modern economy functions. In fact, even understanding the news each day often requires knowledge of microeconomics. So, what is the definition of microeconomics? Microeconomics is the branch of economics that deals with the behavior of individual economic units. These units include consumers, workers, investors, business firms, in fact, any individual that plays a role in the function of our economy. Microeconomics explains how and why these units make economic decisions. For example, it explains how consumers make purchasing decisions and how their choices are affected by changing prices and incomes. It also explains how firms decide how many workers to hire and how workers decide where to work and how much work to do. Another important concern of microeconomics is how economic units interact to form larger units like markets and industries. Microeconomics helps us to understand, for example, why the automobile industry in Kazakhstan developed the way it did and how producers and consumers interact in the market for automobiles. It explains how automobile prices are determined, how much automobile companies invest in new factories, and how many cars are produced each year. By studying the behavior and interaction of individual firms and consumers, microeconomics reveals how industries and markets operate and evolve, why they differ from one another, and how they are affected by government policies and global economic conditions. Much of microeconomics is about limits, the limited incomes that consumers can spend on goods and services, the limited budgets and the limited technology that firms can use to produce things, and the limited number of hours in a week that workers can allocate to labor. But microeconomics is also about ways to make the most of these limits. More precisely, it is about the allocation of scarce resources. For example, microeconomics explains how consumers can best allocate their limited incomes to the different goods and services available for purchase. In modern market economies, consumers, workers, and firms have much more flexibility and choice when it comes to allocating scarce resources. Microeconomics describes the trade-offs that consumers, workers, and firms face and shows how these trade-offs are best made. Consumer theory, that we will study later in this course, describes how consumers, based on their preferences, maximize their well-being by trading off the purchase of more of some goods for the purchase of less of others. Workers also face constraints and make trade-offs. Firms also face limits in terms of kinds of products they can produce and the resources available to produce them. The idea of making optimal trade-offs is an important topic in microeconomics, one that you will encounter throughout this course. A second important topic of microeconomics is the role of prices. All the trade-offs described previously are based on the prices paid by consumers, workers, or firms. For example, a consumer trade-off between beef or chicken based on his preferences for each one, but also on their prices. Microeconomics also describes how prices are determined. In a centrally planned economy, prices are set by government. In a market economy, prices are determined by the interactions of consumers, workers, and firms. These interactions occur in markets, which is the collection of buyers and sellers that together determine the price of a good. The central role of the markets is a third important topic of microeconomics. A market refers to a collection of buyers and sellers who interact and to the possibility for sales and purchases that result from the interaction. Microeconomics involves the study of both perfectly competitive markets in which no single buyer or seller had the impact on price and non-competitive markets in which individual entities can affect price. The market price is established by the interaction of buyers and sellers. In a perfectly competitive market, a single price will usually prevail. In markets that are not perfectly competitive, different sellers might charge different prices. In this case, the market price refers to the average prevailing price. We often want to compare the price of a good today with what it was in the past, or is it likely to be in the future. To make such a comparison meaningful, we need to measure the prices relative to an overall price level. In absolute terms, the price of a dozen eggs is many times higher today than it was 50 years ago. Relative to the prices overall, however, it is actually lower. To account for the effects of inflation, we measure real constant prices rather than nominal or current prices. Real prices use an aggregate price index, such as the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, to correct for inflation. Another important topic in microeconomics is the role of theories and models. In economics, explanation and prediction are based on theories. Theories are developed to explain observed phenomena in terms of a set of basic rules and assumptions. For example, the theory of firms begins with a simple assumption that firms try to maximize their profits. This theory uses the assumption to explain how firms choose the amount of labor, capital, or raw materials that they use for production and the amount of output they produce. With the application of statistical and econometric techniques, theories can be used to construct models from which quantitative predictions can be made. A model is a mathematical representation based on economic theory of a firm, a market, or some other entity. Microeconomics is concerned with both positive and normative questions, which is another important topic. Positive questions deal with explanation and prediction. Normative questions with what ought to be. Suppose the Qatar government imposes a quota on the import of foreign cars. What will happen to the price, production, and the sales of cars? What impact will this policy change have on consumers or on workers in the automobile industry? These questions belong to the realm of positive analysis. However, sometimes we want to go beyond explanation and prediction to ask questions like, what choices are the best? This involves normative analysis, which is also important for both managers of firms and those making public policy. Normative analysis must often be combined with individual value judgments because issues of equity and fairness as well as the economic efficiency may be involved. So basically that's it for today. Thank you for listening to the introductory lecture of Principles of Microeconomics course. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. Good luck and see you soon.